book I read for my book review was Oil and Honey, The Education of an Unlikely Activist. It's by Bill McKibben, and it was publicized by the St. Martin's Press, 175th Avenue, New York, New York. It was written in 2013 and has 263 pages. Bill McKibben has written 13 books, making Oil and Honey his 14th. Before writing this book, he didn't consider himself an activist, just another person interested in his environment around him and in global warming as a whole. I was interested in learning more about global warming and about the people involved in the struggle towards creating a better environment. In class, we have learned important facts about global warming as well as our labs about our carbon footprint. So I think the book falls in line with some of what we've learned in class. I believe that Bill argues that if we exceed a certain amount of carbon emission, which is 350 parts per million in the atmosphere, then the world as we know it will be destroyed. He believes that environmentalists in Congress are not doing enough to keep us from this path, that big oil companies are winning, and that we need to keep that from happening. And yes, he illustrates that point very well. The fact that if we continue living the way we do and supporting the fossil fuel and oil industry, that our lives will come to an end as we know them. The world has risen 0.8 degrees Celsius already. Half of the summer ice in the Arctic is gone, and oceans are 30% more acidic, he states on page 148. If the world increases in temperature by 2 degrees Celsius, which is already underway, there will be no Arctic, and the gas released from such occurrences would cause further damage to the atmosphere. If all of the Antarctic ice melted, sea levels on the around the world would rise about 61 meters. That's 200 feet, which is incredible, and it would cause all kinds of natural disasters unknown to previous human beings in our history. This would cause tsunamis and extreme weather never even dreamed of. While the author states that organizing is not enough, people need to wake up to the reality of global warming, and he still stands on the front lines of the environmentalist movement, changing the world for the better every day. From organizing protests to speaking directly with public officials, Bill McKibben has made a lot of effort to end global carbon emissions and mistreating the environment. Some things that stood out to me when I was reading this book include the most interesting thing I learned was that the queen of the beehive, and I quote, "When the queen's time is up, the hive executes her in a formalized death ritual known as balling the queen, which involves bees forming a solid ball around their mother, pressing harder and harder till she dies." Now, it's kind of unrelated to the overall message of the story, but he does speak about beekeeping and about how beekeeping relates to his day-to-day life with his struggle against the fossil fuel industry and what they're doing to our world today. Another quote, and I quote, "It's extraordinarily rare for the climate locations with 100 and plus years long periods of records to break records day after day after day. This was not the old planet, this was the new one, where the atmosphere contained enough carbon to change everything." Page 93. Speaking about how public officials were paid off to support big oil once, citing Lee Terry, a congressman from the Senate, had received $365,798 for campaign money from Conoco, Chevron, and BP. He voted with them 100% of the time. To take money from people whose interests you'll pretend to judge impartially, that's really a very essential and core point of what he's trying to demonstrate in his book, is that the fossil fuel industry is corrupt and it uses people in the government and politicians to back the corporations by giving them so-called campaign money or helping them out in their campaign and also with their own individual bills and day-to-day lives. The fossil fuel industry, through the Heartland Institute, tried to discredit environmentalists for their work by stating the most prominent advocates of global warming aren't scientists. They're Charles Manson, a mass murderer, Fidel Castro, a tyrant, and Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. This was on page 118. The next day in the narrative was Collect the Dots Day. People from all around the world showing their first-hand knowledge to combat such attacks at the environmentalist movement as this. They came together to combat the disastrous effects of global warming that it had on their day-to-day lives. These hundreds of thousands of people who would spend their weekend rallying didn't believe in global warming, Bill McKibben said. It was the new reality of their world. I would recommend this book to anyone interested in learning about what the oil industry is doing all around the world and what we as individuals can do about it. The author makes it clear that the battle for the environment is far from over, and just reducing our carbon footprint won't cut it. We need to change the way we live our day-to-day lives and start investing in the environment rather than big oil, even if we have a minuscule chance of saving our world from imminent destruction. At the end of the book, I was expecting more of a twist or more of a conclusive understanding of what's going on in the fossil fuel industry and also how the author wanted to combat this. But I found that he did achieve what and clearly stated that he wanted more people involved in the struggle against global warming and dumping carbon into the atmosphere, but that wasn't enough for me. I didn't think that he did a well enough job of describing this overall. I mean, all he stated that he wanted was for people to change the way they're living and also to kind of not donate but be a part of the environmentalist movement. The author clearly demonstrates how he does clearly demonstrate that the world's atmosphere is changing at an unprecedented rate in the last 100 years or so due to carbon emissions. He wants people to get involved and start making changes today. Rather than recycling or going green, he wants a revolution in the way the fossil fuel industry is viewed and the way carbon emissions are handled. Referring to his website 350.org, aimed at organizing an environmental movement, Bill McKibben said, "It's a great planetary hive, less an organization than a loose campaign designed to mesh the internet ethos of distributed action." His website organized rallies all around the world, and the most important one was against the tar sands, tapping the tar sands in Canada. And that pipeline was called the Keystone XL pipeline. And they achieved this goal. Congress lost by 2 votes, or won in his favor by 2 votes, and they didn't end up building the Keystone pipeline, but eventually it ended up getting built, or getting the approval to be built later on in the future, which was devastating for him in this book. All in all, it was a very interesting narrative and a comparison between how honey and how farming and how self-sustainable energy in his life helped him to become the environmentalist that he is today. And he wants people just to be more involved in their communities and also to help out farmers and those people who are working to have self-sustained businesses and practices that are compliant with our atmosphere and our planet as we know it. Thank you. And this is the book I read, Oil and Honey, The Education of an Unlikely Activist. Go get this book. If you want to learn more about the environment and about how the fossil fuel industry has loopholes and different ways of, manipulating people into following their completely destructive agenda, then it's definitely a good read. It's by Bill McKibben, and I read the book. You can tell it went through a lot of wear and tear. Thank you.